Hello and good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar on the topic of COVID-19, Treasury funding, and in particular the Main Street program that's just about to be launched by the Federal Reserve. My name is Vic Farley. I work for the Office of Economic Development here in the city of San Jose, and I'm delighted that today we're able to bring to you Ernst & Young and their key people who are responsible for Main Street to be able to give us a leading presentation on what Main Street is and what it offers the business community. And as a follow-up to the presentation, we'll be having a Q&A. So if you're watching and following, please feel free to use the Q&A box to give us any thoughts or questions or comments as and when we go through the presentation, so that I can then act as the host and we can go through the questions with Ernst & Young and pick it up from there. The city, over the course of the last 9 weeks, has had to respond to the challenge of COVID-19. Many of our businesses have been closed. A number are reopening now. And we have identified the issues around capital, credit, lending are fundamental to the future success of our business community. So we've targeted those issues that we believe will have greatest appeal for business, and the issue of Main Street is topical. So I'm really pleased that we're able to bring this to you today in webinar format. We're recording today so that we can allow people who are not able to join us to have the opportunity to see what's presented and the discussion that takes place. And we will have the PowerPoint as well to be able to offer people after the webinar itself. So that's by way of introduction. Let me introduce the team from Ernst & Young. We have Ibi Krukubo, who is the Lead Senior Director for Silicon Valley, Sandra Tullis, and Ross Hardy. And I believe Ross will be giving us the presentation, and I will be delighted to introduce him now. Welcome, Ross.
Matt, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about this and kind of both lay a ground of what is available from a funding standpoint and the conversation that we've been having, as well as some updates, very recent updates this month that are meant to extend some programs to different businesses, either that couldn't access it before or that may be needing additional help. And so this is what we're going to talk about today. I'll spend maybe the first third just going over what we know, the different ways to access liquidity through the CARES Act and the different federal actions from that, and then some specific actions if you're looking into the Main Street lending program. There are things you'll need and things you'll need to either prepare or have ready as you go and potentially look for a lender and look to participate in that program. And then we'll open it up for Q&A and be able to talk together. So I'll give a brief background. So most everything that is available is encapsulated in the CARES Act. And the whole thing itself, see there, was passed at the end of March. It had a bunch of different things. So this is everything from Title I, which had the payroll protection program for short-term assistance. Title II had the individual, so the individual stimulus checks, some things for the healthcare system, things for very specific businesses. But then Title IV opened up this broad range of facilities and programs and actions that were meant to help, as it says, severely distressed sectors of the economy. And it went out there, and then various updates have been made starting as soon as April. I think they're making about major updates once a month to kind of adjust as necessary as they see companies taking something or not taking something. So I'm going to go to the next page, which is, this is the broad range of actions that came out of the Fed, and some of them, and so the ones not highlighted, these are facilities or actions that were initially done about 12 years ago during the financial crisis, and they were opened back up. But a lot of those were targeted at the banking system, at lenders themselves, at keeping the banking system, as you can see, like a primary dealer credit facility. And so those really weren't enough. And so the things that are highlighted in yellow are ones that are meant to go directly down either to consumers or to businesses. And so the four on the left is one I'll give more information to in terms of a corporate credit facility, both in a primary and secondary market. Um, the the Paycheck Protection Program through the Small Business Administration, as well as what we'll talk more in depth of, which is the Main Street Business Lending Program, and specifically the 3 different loan programs underneath there. And so when we look at the 4 main actions, these are meant to go directly to businesses. Now, the first 2 are very specific about corporate credit. So this is where there'll be a purchase of corporate bonds, either in the primary and the secondary market. Those are more direct with the Fed through the special purpose vehicles. There's a lot more restrictive in that. Distribution of funds is through oversight, and there's a lot. If you weren't already in that kind of corporate credit market, this really isn't for you. So a lot of people first went to that Paycheck Protection Program. It was meant to be short term. I think it was 8 weeks, meant to basically keep people on staff if you had to shut down or close stores or just stop your operations completely. But then now, as the economy is having this lull and we're still not open up, definitely not cross-border, and even internally, things are still closed, things are slow to open up. The Main Street Business Lending Program has been expanded to one, if a business was unable to access the Paycheck Protection Program, this was another vehicle for them. But this is also in addition to, so this is one of the few programs that allows you multiple sources of funding if it wasn't enough or you need additional financial support to be able to do this. Now, this lending program isn't purely direct with the Fed. It'll be through an approved lender, but that lender also has the benefit of basically getting a 95% coverage from this Fed facility. And so they only have to retain 5% of the loan risk when they do that. So it's better than just a new loan from an existing lender. Taking advantage of this program helps out the lenders as well. I'll take a highlight of that darker box over on the bottom right. There are certain eligibility requirements, certain things you have to be as a company, US company, and certain things you can and specifically can't do. It's generally encapsulated in all the covenants and compliance requirements, specifically the ones called out there: limits on buybacks and dividends, limits on executive compensation, usually mean freezing in most cases, or pausing during the period at which that you're paying back the loan. In general, what it is, but the Fed has the very detailed list. And of course, if you go to the lender, they'll have that as well. And so what I wanted to get in more is I wanted to get you more details about update of that Main Street program, what it is. So we'll go through each of these, even if the criteria hasn't changed, but talk about how it's opened up and then what you can do with it. So the main target is, if you're a company, and this is a good thing, it's an either or situation, either fewer than 15,000 employees or less than $5 billion in revenue. And there's some specific revenue calculations that I'll get into more detail of. But it's the same criteria as before, though you cannot be receiving other aid through the specific Title IV of the CARES Act, which just means if you did take a PPP loan, that's okay. You can still look at the Main Street program. But if you've done other funding through another vehicle, specifically in Title IV, then this would not be available. But so what they're looking at is, the same kind of criteria. You'll look at, one of the reasons for this update is what they really want is your 2019 financials. And the next slide I'll get into gets into more detail about what that is. But this extra time, as they put this out the end of March, and everybody had 2019 finalized in many cases. Now we're close to mid-June. A lot of businesses have finalized their 2019 numbers, and so that's what they want people to take advantage of. The 2 big changes, we can see the minimum loan amount is dropped. So if there were companies that either couldn't or didn't want to take $500,000 loan, it's now cut in half. 250,000 opens up to smaller businesses that may not need that much. as well as a maximum loan amount. The original program was only 25 million. There are three different limits here. The ones that most people take on is the 35 or 50 million. And there's some additional updates that actually help lenders who are going up to that $50 million. Originally, they had to retain a 15% stake in the loan. Now it's only 5%. So the lenders themselves are more incentivized to get that higher amount. So to provide more support, even if someone, like, you get a certain amount under the PPP loan, but you need more up to $50 million, that is available. The pricing remains the same, which is fairly low. So it is based on LIBOR, which is a 1 or 3 month adjustable rate. And there are considerations for the fact that the tenor of these loans is projected to go beyond the end of when LIBOR is being reported, but there's traditional fallback language that is advised in there. And this new program kind of started basically earlier this month, June 8th, was when, again, the lenders can start working with this and extending loans under this Main Street program. But it is that ending window is still there, which is September 30th. Now, this is just when the new loan has to be made. The better update, as you see at the bottom of the screen, is the length of that loan. Previously was up to 4 years, now is up to 5 years. So therefore, taking an additional year to repay that loan. The amortization is different, so you can defer principal payments for up to 3 years, defer interest for up to a year, though it's capitalized. And right now, the minimum repayment schedule is just 15% at the end of year 3, another 15 at the end of year 4, but then the balloon payment 70% by the end of the 5 years. And so those are the main updates, is extending the time of which that you have to repay this, and both the minimum and the maximum amounts for eligibility. And so what I want to do next is focus on what you need. If this program is interesting to your finance group and you say, this, I think we can get a good source of financing here, your lender's going to want some information. The first number, the 2019 revenues, that's really just making sure that you do qualify for the Main Street. You're going to basically prove that you have less than 5 billion, but also having less than 15,000 employees qualifies you. But having that available will be part of what you need for your application. The main thing to hone in on, I've got some examples of what they're looking at, is your 2019 adjusted EBITDA. If you have US GAAP audited financial statements, that's what they'll come from. They don't have to be if you're not required to be in US GAAP compliance. But the good thing that they kind of put in there is it is an adjusted EBITDA, but there's no new way to do that. And the way I'm saying that is, the way that the existing methodology for calculating EBITDA is going to be agreed upon by the lender and the borrower, which it typically is when you do a loan, but it has to be based on an existing methodology that was used prior to this kind of COVID-19 and CARES Act. So there can't be any new way to calculate EBITDA that may be in favor of the lender. It has to use an existing methodology that the lender had already used to extend credit prior to beginning of the program. And so that number there, your 2019 adjusted EBITDA, is what's going to determine your maximum loan amount. And I'll get into a calculation on the next slide. The 2019 audited financial statements is just a general, this is just required by the lender for the borrower certifications and covenants. The thing is, it's only required to be US GAAP compliant if the borrower was already subject to that reporting requirements. Otherwise, they're just looking for financial statements that have been reviewed or prepared for tax filings. So nothing potentially new that you'd have to put together by this time of the year based on 2019. So what I want to get back to is that adjusted EBITDA. And first, I give you one of the things to do for the revenues is they want to make sure you include affiliate revenues, and they'll walk through that. But they want to make sure that they're not taking a company that has one specific revenue number less than 5 billion, but if you include their affiliate revenue is much larger. That's the main calculation. So when you do this, you'll have to make sure you have affiliate company revenues in there. But that's, if it's less than 5 billion, or you're well less than 5 billion, then you qualify for the Main Street program. the adjusted EBITDA. So that's the important one because it used to calculate what your maximum loan size is and specifically which program you might fall into under the Main Street facility. So there's, again, 2 examples for the new loan facility, which maxes out at 35 million, the priority loan facility, which maxes out at 50 million. So you're really looking for that difference between 35 and 50. And then for others that don't qualify for others, there's an extended loan program that tops out at 300 million, but that's more for larger, and there's some additional restrictions on that. But here's what it'll look at. So it's EBITDA plus, and so it's an EBITDA, it's a multiple of EBITDA plus other numbers. So they do have you include any existing, outstanding, and undrawn available debt. Now, if you don't have any debt, then that's there. But if you do have some, that'll be that max added to that max as well. And if you're in the new loan facility, it's 4 times EBITDA. So an example here of, see, companies calculated $4 million was their 2019 EBITDA. 4 times that, which is the 60 million, plus their existing outstanding and available debt. For example, it's 1 million. 17 million will be the maximum loan balance. Now it's, because it's lower than 35, you're in the Main Street new loan facility. Now, you don't have to take 17, obviously, but that's the max that you could. But let's say in that second example, you had those same numbers and you wanted to know what you could do. The priority loan facility factor is at 6 times EBITDA plus your existing outstanding and undrawn available debt. So in the case that you might have EBITDA that would put you over the $35 million work, and that's what you're interested in doing, then it's the Main Street priority loan facility that you'd be able to take advantage of. And you can see the calculation here. It's a 6 times EBITDA multiplication plus your existing outstanding and undrawn available debt that would determine your maximum loan amount. So in this example, $44 million. That would be what you could take, where before this update, there was a difference from the lender standpoint between their basically cost of extending a new loan versus a priority loan in terms of how much they had to retain, but that distinction has been removed. So that's allowing lenders to potentially be more willing to do higher in the priority loan facility. And the extended loan facility is to kind of your very niche companies that would need over $50 million, but up to 300 million. But it follows the same 6 times EBITDA multiple. So if you find yourself in that situation where you need more than 50 and this calculation calculates to that, then the Main Street extended loan facility is the one you might look at, but it does have additional restrictions. So you might have to look into that more, but they're mainly around the type of reporting and the other type of items you have to be in compliance with. This, I'm not going to go into much in this. There is an update to the Paycheck Protection Program, but this is in there as we send out the slides. You can look at that later, because this is also available. If you hadn't taken it, you can do the Main Street and the Protection Program together. There's some updates that allow you to basically use it longer, pay it back longer if it's not forgiven, and potentially use it on other things that aren't payroll. So, and that's mostly my good promise, taking up only 15 minutes. So I want to open it up, and we can go back to further clarifications on anything. I'm going to open it up or hand it back over to the facilitator so you can open it back up and see about any questions that we may have.
Thank you, Ross. That was fantastic. Thank you for such a thorough walkthrough of what Main Street represents with the different options in front of a business. I've got a number of questions. Can I just get the ball rolling by asking you, can a business with very low profit, with a very small EBITDA, but a very high available debt, is there a ratio here? Or if I had sort of like 50 million of debt and 1 million of profit, does that mean I can go for a $51 million Main Street loan? What's the kind of rule of thumb here?
Technically, yes. So there's no ratio disqualifier, if you will. for the calculation of the maximum loan amount. But then that's would get into the individual lenders, which if you already had a business you were working, or a lender you were working with from other debt, or you're looking at a new one, they might have ratios of whether they're willing to lend to you based on that. But as a participation in the Main Street program, there's no ratio requirement for EBITDA to outstanding debt.
Got it. A question from an attendee. How do you determine EBITDA if your company only started in January 2020?
That is because it might back up. And so one of the issues we might be facing is there are requirements for when you have had to have been a business. But if so you're in a U.S. business prior to the passage of this act, which if it's January 2020, sounds like you are, they're really looking at, and that might be where you can't use EBITDA as part of that calculation. But the lender has ways of looking at that.
Okay.
Either revenues prepared for tax filings, or something like that, to where they can use that plus existing outstanding debt. So just because you don't have 2019 numbers doesn't preclude you, or say no profit in 2019 doesn't preclude you from participating in this. Because if you were a business open before the act was passed, you can look at qualifying for this. So I think there's not a lot of lender guidance on that. So you might have to help your lender understand what you can provide. But
Right.
looking at revenue and profitability numbers, it could be to date or what you've already prepared for tax filings is one of the things that is acceptable in lieu of a full 2019 number.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, a follow-up to that would be presumably really what the intention of the Federal Reserve here is to do is to ensure credit for profitable companies. They don't really want to fund or take the risk of holding 95% of the debt on a company that is not profitable. Is that how you would see that, or am I oversimplifying here?
It's not already profitable. I think there's the understanding that the 2020 year may not be profitable, especially year to date would not be potentially profitable for a lot of companies, but that a company that wasn't already in distress, that's the theme when you look across other facilities as well and other lending mechanisms. A company that wasn't already in distress, isn't in the process of filing for bankruptcy or anything like that, that was already kind of doing what it's doing. It may, even if it was semi-unprofitable or very low profit, it wasn't failing per se. And that it was there so this program even specifically is also a pass-through through the lender to help both the lender extend credit and the borrower get that loan, where they couldn't get it elsewhere, where they couldn't get a very high credit, or very high interest loan, or very restrictive loan.
Do you think that this is a great way to refinance debt? Main Street? Just listening to what you're saying.
I'd say it's a good opportunity to get debt because the payback period is longer. There are covenants about how you have to pay it back, so you could potentially you would have to pay this back before you could pay back other items of existing debt that are in longer tenor. So if you had potentially a higher rate but longer term debt, then you could have this or in shorter term as well. Sorry, shorter term debt. So the main issue is they don't want you taking longer term debt and using to pay that off with this shorter term loan. But obviously, if you have existing debt that is coming due, let's say within the tenor of this, then that option is available to take this and use it to basically keep your company afloat, meeting its debt obligations for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I was trying to think of it, thank you, Ross, is in terms of there's sort of two options broadly for business here. One is around the issue of if you've got debt that's about to expire within the next 5 years, this is a great way to kind of bring in very competitive rates of debt into your business. And the second one is a lot of businesses in Silicon Valley, and in particular in the city of San Jose in 2019, had a good year. the financials for 2019 for a lot of businesses were good. So this could be a really good opportunity or a good window to secure a level or a loan at a rate that you couldn't otherwise have got.
Right. I think that, yeah, especially if you building up 2018, 2019 with a good profitable year, and
Yeah,
then you have this major slash across your whole business model, um, because everybody had to stop and nobody could travel, nobody could do anything, then that they won't be able to kind of continue that going. And that's why, like, this is that good medium term. It's
yeah,
not, some of the other programs are very short term. They're meant to get you through the next 3-6 months,
mm,
the end of 2020. This is that good medium term, because this one, that the principal payback doesn't even have to start for 2 years, and it actually pushes it out to where you could only have to pay 30% of the amortizing balance by the end of the 4th year. And then, it's after that 4th year, talking 2025, um, that this would push out that loan balance and to push those payments out.
great. I've got more questions from participating in the
Sure.
audience. I just wanted to remind everyone who is participating, you can use the Q&A to let us know what questions you'd like me to put. Please do so. So looking at something that came in, do we know which lenders are participating in Main Street? I've not seen that personally.
I haven't either. There hasn't been a approved list. Technically, any lender in good standing with the Fed should be able to do it, but then it'd be up. Obviously, it's up to them.
Mhm.
And depending on what they're doing. So there's some that are facilitating loans through the Small Business Administration. That's what the PPP does. And so those can also do this automatically or
Right,
ready to go. They don't have to do anything new. But if you weren't signed up with being able to do this, there is some little bit of legwork that lenders would have to do. But I'd say lenders, almost all lender that can do that, or with good standing with the Fed, can take advantage of this program, but they may not have set it up already.
got it,
There's a
got it.
lot of different pieces that they could participate in, and if they weren't already doing the PPP as part of Small Business Administration, and they weren't doing some of the other facilities, this may require a little bit of ramp up for them to get going, but
Got
it
it.
is available
I will follow
right
up
now.
on that for the person who
Mm.
asked that question. I know from last week when I was looking at the background, if anyone's interested, it's the Federal Reserve of Boston that is leading on Main Street. And they have if you check on the FAQ, they also then have a subsection for lenders and a
Mhm.
subsection for borrowers. So if you're interested in knowing more from a lender perspective, go directly that route. If you're interested more from a borrower perspective, look at it from the other route. And if you're a CPA, make sure you look at both, would be my thought on that. Yeah, interesting stuff. I think it's fair to say when I was doing my research on Main Street and outside of the Fed, I think most of the big banks are already approved because a lot of these
Yep.
facilities pre-existed the statements that the Fed made once COVID started. I think that's kind of where we're at. Completely different question for you, Ross.
Sure.
What covenants for the payback are there? Do you know?
So most of them relate. So there's covenants specifically related to kind of what you do with excess money.
Mm-hmm.
Just to kind of summarize it, you're limited on stock buybacks if that was available to you, or dividends, again, if that was available to you. But primarily it's about prepaying other debt. So there are mandatory amortization of the principal, but like it's not much. It's
Mm-hmm.
only 15% by the end of the 3rd year. That's
Yeah,
that first kind of gate.
yeah,
But other than that, it basically, this loan can't be subordinated to others.
right,
So you couldn't, other than loan payments that you already had coming due in the next 5 years or 3 to 5 years, you couldn't use this to pay off or prepay any other debt. That's most of those the restricting covenants. Um, The executive compensation one's actually more about a freeze rather than a reduction.
Got it.
You potentially have to freeze payment levels to what they were in 2019 for certain levels of executives.
Got it. Yeah. An interesting question here is, we've got a business that wants to use funds for construction purposes, essentially investment. They're in the process of getting a loan from the bank. Should they continue to apply for this loan, or should they stop and apply for Main Street? And are they prevented from doing so if they already secured an EIDL loan? Quite a bit in that question.
They're not. I'll do both. So the EIDL doesn't specifically prevent you from applying for this. Obviously, it would be calculated into the factor of the existing loans that you have.
Yeah.
But it doesn't preclude you specifically from applying. They can definitely look at it. If you're already business construction looking to get a loan, compare it to what this is, specifically when in terms of that payback period. So
Right.
it is lower rate potentially, but has this very short and a tiny step and then a big balloon at the end.
Right.
And so kind of comparing that flow of funds requirement to see if it meets, if it still meets what either your payback or what your cash flow situation would be. And because they just defer interest for a year. And so it's really about the cash flow towards the end, year 3, 4, and 5. If it still meets that criteria, then they can switch. And then, of course, because you could have existing loans, you could do both or split. If you were to look at, say, okay, I only take this amount from here and this amount from here based
Right.
upon what you qualify for under that Main Street program.
That's a really interesting answer, Ross. So you're basically saying you could really go for both. You could as a construction company look at a spreadsheet. You could look at a spreadsheet and say, hey, this is the cost of loan A, this is the cost of Main Street. I've got a project that's, say, going to be built out in the next 24 months when I've got all the heavy expenditure. That could be more about Main Street because I'm not going to have to pay out on that loan in that period. Or it could be, no, I've got a construction project that, say, runs for 5 years, and actually the cost of capital should be shared around in different forms rather than just exclusively Main Street. Yeah, interesting. What I like about this is it gives the business owner, the CFO, more options.
Yeah, and that's definitely when we looked at you look at the different facilities, this one that's meant to be, an additional option to the looking at how to get funds from the market, how to make sure that you can keep getting funds. Rather than, because you could continue with a loan through your regular lender or some other kind of facility.
Yeah.
But this was also out there specifically if you couldn't access it, or it was the cost of accessing it was too much, or if you needed more. And so this was one of those flexible programs. Like, let's say you got what you needed out of an existing loan you're already working with. This could be if you needed more. You couldn't get what you needed before this additional facility or program is available.
Yeah. I mean, when I looked at it as a bit from a business owner perspective, I thought to myself, this is potentially a 5-year stabilization loan. I could look at it as a 5-year window where I needed X amount of dollars because I had this level of commitment to cash flow and cost and third-party commitments. And I could plan for that period. I thought that was a really interesting kind of perspective that I took from Main Street, rather than the short term of 8 weeks to 24 weeks that gets you kind of to the end of 2020. This, in theory, could get you up to 2025, and it's a different economy by then.
Right. Yeah, it could get you beyond, the slow restart. It could get you beyond the, if you're thinking from an operation, it would get you beyond, I don't know, a vaccine or so whatever might actually get back to normal, and you're in past the recovery into whatever's next. Then only then 2024, 2025, do you need to look at the closing of this facility, of this loan.
Okay, follow-up question is, what is the time the lenders would be able to fund this loan to us for? So you have to apply by, I think it was September 30th. Is that
September
right?
30th is
Right.
when, and so the good thing about this, unless changed by legislative act, the
Mhm.
program is open until September 30th. So lenders have up until then. They can't, like I said, a lender could decide across the board not to participate anymore, but the program itself is open until September 30th. So, up until that date, a lender can, even if they've not done one before, can do a new loan out of this program or continue to do new loans out of this program.
Yeah.
So it's available now. But then even if you have a lender that says, look, I don't know what to do now, it's going to take me a while to get up, they have almost a little over 3 months to kind of get something up to speed, and they can still make loans out of this program if they hadn't done it yet before.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I guess my takeaway from what you're saying, Ross, is act now. Go and get the information now from your lender.
Yeah, go and get the information now. If you haven't started the conversation with your lender, you have a lender of choice or one that you've already have a relationship with or several,
Yep.
start up that conversation, figure out where they're at. There is plenty of resources for them if they don't know what's going on or what's available. That's the Fed Boston that you mentioned. They're putting a lot in there because that's part of their job, is to help educate lenders
Yep.
into, hey, how do you use this program? How can you help get this to people? And so there's enough runway for them to do that. And then you can start, by this time, hopefully you can have your 2019 numbers, or at least start preparing what you need, your revenue and your EBITDA numbers that would help just know what's that maximum loan size. How close are you compared to what you need compared to what that maximum could be?
Got it. Yeah. Different question for you, Ross.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an undocumented small business owner. Can I access this program?
Because the basic qualifications really are about being a U.S. company. So it's got to be a company registered in the U.S. And you probably meet that lower than 15,000, less than 5 billion. That's kind of that first entry criteria,
Yep.
to at least start calculating what that is.
Yep.
And then if you have your numbers, so even if you don't, because not everybody has US GAAP financials, and they were very clear, like if you have it, great. But if not, you're not required to get to that level.
Right.
Anything that might be reviewed, even reviewed by an accountant or prepared for tax filings, is kind of their minimum of, like, if you just prepared something because you had to file taxes because you're in California, that kind of information is sufficient to start from,
Okay.
to approach a lender and say, hey, I've at least got this. I know what my 2019 revenues are that I reported my tax filing. I know or I can calculate what my EBITDA is. And then you work with the lender, they can help you calculate what that is with those numbers and say, that can get me my starting
Right.
maximum loan balance.
We have a lot of undocumented business owners in the city of San Jose. We're one of the most multicultural immigrant cities across the United States. I always ask people, define undocumented for me. That's kind of a key question here, because some definitions or the status of the person prevents them, and for others it allows them. It really, I think if you're the person in the audience who's interested in that question, I would go and talk to an attorney or a CPA, I think, just to get confirmation on the detail of that, which may be positive or negative. It really does depend on who you are, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And a lot of it will depend on the status of your company,
yeah,
meaning like corporation, LLC. There are certain things that are open to like sole proprietors that aren't others. And there's some newer updates that open things up to sole proprietors that weren't open before. But you got to verify that status of how that registered company is. Is it being a corporation, or even an LLC? Kind of like that's what they'll look at. The status of the people
right.
as a part of that are kind of irrelevant. If you've got that encapsulated business, then that's what they'll start with.
Got it. Got it. Do you think Main Street is appropriate or inappropriate for VC funded businesses? We have a lot of VC funded businesses in the Valley here. They may have a lot of turnover, but not necessarily a lot of profit in terms of traditional GAAP standard of EBITDA, but nonetheless, they may be carrying debt. Do you think this is an option, or is the Fed and not really wanting to see private equity VC funded businesses in Main Street?
Well, they specifically said they don't want to see the VCs themselves. And so that's the only kind of ineligibility that they've made clear.
Right.
But even if the company itself is VC funded, that doesn't preclude them from participating in this.
Mm-hmm.
While it may not be intended for it, it's intended to be the extend that kind of business lending credit through a lender. So if you have a lender who would have lended to you anyway, in addition to maybe whatever you have from the VC funded, then that's still available to them. They just wanted to make sure that that the actual venture capital organizations themselves didn't have access to it because they have access to other facilities.
Right.
That this was directly to a company with specific operations. But even if you are VC funded, this is definitely an option.
Got it.
Because you may not have a very high 2019 EBITDA number, but as you build that calculation together, you can at least have something, because you use your existing outstanding undrawn debt to say, okay, that's something that I can at least build from and get a number as part of the Main Street program.
Yeah, I saw this being potentially very interesting for tech companies, particularly ones that are ambitious over the next few years, ones that have already got a track record, they've already established themselves, they've got gap standard accounts, they're into multiple funding rounds. I thought, oh, this could be quite an interesting proposition. And so it's that's why I was intrigued to present this to the business community here in the city, because I was beginning to think through, there are a number of different options and avenues for business owners and CFOs to consider alongside their existing debt loan management systems. Any final questions? This is looking good. Thank you. I'm delighted that people have been asking questions and I've been able to put them to you, Ross. Any final thoughts, Ross, from you to businesses here in San Jose about Main Street, PPP and EIDL? Any final thoughts you might want to just wrap us up with?
Right. I'd say don't confuse Main Street with some of the shorter term things, some of the emergency funding. So the PPP is like more emergency. You want to keep people on staff through a short period of time and you think you're going to bounce back. Main Street is that kind of 3 to 5 year time horizon of, I need funding that through that. So you may need funding to get you through the next 2 to 3 years. That's what this is, that kind of medium time. It's a different play in your cost of capital, and so definitely consider this, even if you didn't think you needed a PPP before or needed some of that emergency funding. Even if you have, say, you have cash to get you through the end of the year, that's not what Main Street is for. Main Street is for that 3 to 5 year recovery. This is an option that you may have already been there before. Maybe you could have gone to your lender and gotten a loan like this, but it may have been higher price or more restrictive covenants. This is backed 95% by the Fed, so that the lender doesn't have to take on that additional risk, and they can keep that credit flowing to you, even though the lender may not know what they're going to be at in 3 to 5 years. But this is backed by the Fed for that longer term than just towards the end of 2020.
Got it. Very good, Ross. This has been fantastic. Thank you. And also thank your colleagues Sandra and EB. As a team, you've been great for the city. Thank you very much indeed. Can I say to anyone checking in, any participant, we'll be delighted to provide you with the PowerPoint afterwards and a recording of this. So this has been a really interesting webinar. I hope you found it of interest. Main Street gives the business owner, the CFO, another option to consider in terms of that medium-term financing, lending, borrowing and repayment strategy that businesses will need to come through COVID-19 and plan ahead. And the city of San Jose wants to back you and support you and make it happen for you. So this is part of our way of making sure that you've got the best information in front of you to make the right decision. Can I thank you all very much for participating today, and let me hand you back to our technical host, Mirza. Thank you.